Okay, this is the last in our series of the Jewish background of the Bible. This is part 13 on modern Israel. This is part 14. I did part 13 on modern Israel last week. What it is the part 13 was so long I had to split it into two, 13 and 14. So, this is part 14. Okay, languages in Israel today. Hebrew is the official language. Arabic has a special status under Israeli law. Jews must learn Arabic. I think now the Arabs used to have to learn Hebrew, and maybe they don't. There's something that's going on over there now which has got some people upset. English. Russian is 20% of the population, mainly immigrants from the former Soviet Union. It was something like 1.5 million that immigrated to Israel after the Russians let them go. The Russians always did let a few go, including some relatives of mine, third cousins. But generally, if you applied for emigration to Israel from Russia, you could lose your job, blah, blah, blah. And they had this campaign, let my people go. And finally, when the Soviet Union officially collapsed, they were able to go. French, Spanish, Amharic because of Ethiopians, Yiddish, mainly the Haredi, but some others are learning it for cultural reasons. There's sentimental reasons to learn it. If you go to Williamsburg, New York, you get a Hasidic population of probably about 300,000, and Yiddish is their native language. It's actually a native language. I think this might be a little bit in Belgium, maybe Brussels. Also, there's a city in Russia, right near the Russian-Chinese border, and the official language is Yiddish. But for the most part, it's not really an official language anymore. It's not a native language except Williamsburg, New York, and in Israel and a few places. Romanian, German. Now, my second Hebrew teacher, Meir Kegel, mentioned that he said something like they heard people, I think, in Jerusalem talking, and I think it was a Romanian dialect that they thought had died out 200 years ago.
Your hand is in the...
My hand's in the way? Oh, okay. But anyway, there's interesting things about language. I remember reading about these two sisters that were raised by a grandmother pretty much in isolation, and they developed their own language. This was in the United States. And people were studying them. How does language develop? These girls came up with their own language. The ethnic makeup of Israel today. Thanks to David Reinberg, by the way, who gave me this information. Jewish, Arabs from all parts of the Middle East, it's 20% of the population. Druze, we don't know much about the Druze religion because the Druze don't talk about their religion. Circassians, mentioned that last time. They're an ethnic group from the North Caucasus, an area in southwest Russia between the Black and Caspian Seas. Bedouin. I visited the Bedouin a long time ago with a friend of mine. They lived in their black goat hair tents. They were Israeli Arabs. They were not Palestinian or West Bank Arabs. And it was interesting because I went to a tent and a guy came out, and it looked so dark as you look in the door. It's like his wife must have had a lamp in there or something, or he couldn't have found his way around. They have black goats, and they use material to make their tents. And then my friend and I talked to them in Hebrew, and we were around a campfire ring. Now there was no fire, it was daytime. 4 or 5 Arabs. In their long, I don't think they dress like this anymore, in their long white robes. And one of them said something like about research. He said we can put a stick in the ground and know within 10 minutes what time of day it is. And he mentioned something about research teams from some university coming to learn that stuff because they knew it would be forgotten. And I'm looking at these Arabs and I'm looking at their wristwatches. Yeah, you're going to forget this, okay? You will, because you're wearing watches, you're not putting sticks in the ground anymore. But it really was probably something like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived a long time ago. Bedouin, there were a lot down the Negev, and they were nomadic down there, and what happens is their black goats are environmental terrorists. I saw a documentary in the Netherlands, and much of it was in English because of how they're interviewing people, and this Israeli soldiers explaining why he's going around shooting black goats. Because they're Israel under the Turks and then the Arabs really got pretty much denuded of vegetation. Part of it was Turkish policy, part of it was these black goats. It's the same thing in the out west, the old range wars between cattlemen and shepherds, because cows are bigger, but when a cow eats grass, it'll grow back afterwards. And when a goat or a sheep eats grass, they have sharper hooves, especially the sheep, and they tend to eat so far down the grass won't grow back again. I read recently they're having the same problem in the Russian steppe. You have cattle and you have goats or sheep, which are lighter but really do a lot of damage to the environment. Anyway, Genesis 29, 22 to 25, we see Jacob marrying, he thinks it's Rachel, it turns out to be Leah. But it mentions the men of the place. What, were there no women? Of course, I looked it up in Hebrew, and the word is anashim, which can mean people, it can mean men, so you can't really tell by that. Maybe they could back then. It mentions, and you're figuring she's wearing a veil, right? Because remember, later on, or actually earlier, when Rebecca saw Isaac, she had a veil. She put her veil on. And it does mention in Genesis 29 at Jacob's first wedding that it was the evening, so it's probably dark. When you're out at these, we're used to see lights all over the place. You know how often here in Oak Ridge I see people at night without their headlights on? Because you start up your car, and if it's not automatic like it is in my car, you might forget to turn your headlights on because you got all these street lights, you don't know that it's dark. Now, of course, out on the highway you do, or out in the country. But it's dark. No wonder this guy got fooled. And another pastor friend of mine, when he told him, he says, yeah, people drink at weddings. So there might have been drinking involved. How do you fool a guy by giving him the wrong wife? If it were just the men and not the women wouldn't have gone for this ruse, so they would have recognized it. They probably would have stopped it. And it might have just been the people. Certainly the veil, we could presume a veil, and it wasn't the evening, so it was dark, and had they been drinking. But when you see the Bedouin, it was like going back thousands of years. And it's a culture that's been destroyed, especially down the Negev, where they can't have nomads anymore. The Negev is very well developed now, I've been told. When I was there, it was a big sandbox. But of course they got the Judean desert, but a lot of it's been developed, especially they got a lot of Russians down there and stuff like that.
But how do they survive out there? Where are they getting food? Where are they getting water?
Water, they get it from the Jordan River now.
Yeah.
Now back in those days, there were some springs and stuff. I remember a trip we took on my second little pond. I don't remember where it was. We get on a bus and we go out, and you're in the middle of nowhere. And we start walking, and you go down this ravine. And all of a sudden, well, I guess they call it wadi, you see water flowing. And then you see this monastery. And we visited the monastery, which was very interesting. They had a bunch of skulls of people that had previously been monks there. Now, St. Catherine's in the Sinai is really famous, right? They got a whole pile of skulls. This one, they just had them lined up. And then they had where they would, or a monk that wanted isolation could go up in this thing, and they lift up food to him, stuff like that. He didn't have to really see anybody or talk to anybody. But you could see the water, and we did see an Arab woman walking. It's interesting, the Arabs protect themselves from the sun by wearing a lot of clothes. The modern Israeli Jews, now of course the religious Jews are covered, but the modern secular Israeli Jews are kind of like our beaches, they go around with a whole lot less on. You can see the conflict there, culture clash. But it did see an Arab woman, and this water, there are places where there's water like Ein Gedi. And
But we saw Bedouins when we were over there, and they were just out in the middle of nowhere with.
Yeah. They have water supplies.
How are they're in sand? How are they feeding their animals?
Wells. There were wells also. There was one place we went on a well, which was interesting. You go down a bunch of steps, like in stone, and then you're below the water table, and there's the water. And I don't know. That's probably why there aren't too many of them and why they're so nomadic. They find some food, the goats eat them up. You got to move around. That's why they're nomadic. And there are some places with water. Moses, it mentions they went to a place with, palm trees and everything, 12 of one, 70 of another, which is interesting because that's how Jesus sent them out, first 12, then 70. You ever wonder, when you read Exodus and Leviticus, how in the world are they building an ark? Yes, they got gold and jewels from the Egyptians. They spoiled the Egyptians, but they got wood out there, and they're sacrificing, so they got wood out there. And they're building a tabernacle, so they got wood out there. You ever wonder how? You have to go to Deuteronomy, where it mentions an oasis that they spent time at. And that's the water supply. You had to wash sacrifices and stuff. That's where they probably got their wood. Israeli Jews are mainly Sephardic, Jews in the Middle Eastern countries, or Mizrahi. Now here's the thing again. Ashkenazi Jews are Eastern Central European, of that extraction, like me. Maybe even maybe Germany, like West Germany and stuff. Well, Germany, before Hitler wiped out most of them. My relatives and my grandparents are from Russia, Poland, and Lithuania. Now, I did find out my maternal grandfather is from Russia. I called my mother and asked. I didn't know that. So I got two grandfathers from Russia, one grandmother from Lithuania, and one grandmother from Poland. We're Ashkenazi Jews. Sephardic Jews were in the Iberian Peninsula. They got kicked out of Spain in 1492, either convert or else. Kicked out of Portugal in 1497. They were told in 1496, next year you're out of here if you don't convert. These are Sephardic Jews because Sephard is the Hebrew word for Spain. Now, they went all around the Mediterranean basin. They were Western and Eastern Sephardic Jews. But Mizrahi Jews are Eastern Jews, generally living in Arab countries, and a lot of the Sephardic Jews had to go to the same countries. Well, especially Turkey, the Balkans, the Sephardic Jews there, but really all over the Mediterranean, on the coastlines. So they mixed and intermarried. So the terms Sephardic and Mizrahi even today are not completely understood by most people. And you even read something about Mizrahi Jews, but they're calling them Sephardic Jews. Well, there has been a lot of intermarriage because the Sephardic Jews ended up in places where the Mizrahi Jews were already living. Remember that Jews during the Babylonian dispersion went to Babylon. Most of them didn't come back with Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. They liked it. They stayed. So you had populations there for thousands of years. So they're mainly Sephardic or Mizrahi. Mainly from Morocco, Yemen, Iraq, and Egypt, but also other Middle Eastern and North African countries. There's a Baha'i community. Their spiritual capital is in Haifa, or Haifa as they call it in Hebrew. It's an interesting place to visit. They got these beautiful, you go up a hill and they got all these nice trees and everything, and they got some building there. It's really very nice. Ashkenazi culture, which is Western culture, basically East European, but Western culture has predominated in Israel. So even if they're not the majority of the population, the culture, which is taking over the world, has taken over in Israel. And they had arguments about, back when Israel was being formed, you had a lot of Jews from Arab countries, and David Ben-Gurion, their first prime minister, remember the president doesn't have the real political power, he's a figurehead, it's the prime minister. He wanted, and he was Ashkenazi, he wanted that culture to predominate. It's more literate, more educated, from richer countries, and of course is that good old-fashioned racism, they're lighter skinned. Okay, Ashkenazi Jews are lighter skinned than Sephardic Jews. That's probably a little racism involved. And he wanted that, and he was a dictator. He really was. If you ever read about the Altalene affair and sinking a ship with a bunch of arms that's supposed to go to the Israeli army and stuff, he really was a dictator. Among Israelis, so basically it has predominated Ashkenazi culture, but Western, because it's Western, and Western culture is taken over all over the world. Peter the Great of Russia realized the key to Russia lay to the West. Nasser of Egypt wanted to westernize, industrialize, modernize, and basically westernize his country. Other Arabs were in their traditional clothing. He was in suit and tie. So a lot of people have realized, even in those parts of the world, the West, if you modernize, you industrialize, you got to look west. Among Israel's Jewish population, over 25% of school children and over 35% of all newborns are of mixed Ashkenazi and Sephardi or Mizrahi descent. And these figures have been increasing by approximately 0.5% annually. Over 50% of the entire Israeli Jewish population is of at least partial Sephardi Mizrahi descent.
Is there any, I guess, I don't know if you want to call it cultural or racial friction between these different groups?
Yeah, and we'll get into that later in this presentation.
Okay.
It is not really severe. It's not like Jews and Arabs fighting in rockets and all that stuff, but there is certainly friction. Personality of Israelis. It's informal. When I was there, you see a bank teller and he's got his shirt with a couple of buttons open and a pack of cigarettes there, and he's wearing shorts and sandals. That was typical. Physician, I've been watching a bunch of videos on diet, what you should eat and shouldn't eat. And they got all these people on TEDx, those TEDx videos. All these physicians, this is what you should eat, this is what you shouldn't eat. They get an Israeli physician and he's wearing jeans. This is a modern video. It is an informal culture. Yes, you see people in jackets and ties, maybe more than in the old days, but it really is an informal culture. Everyone gets drafted, pretty much everyone, when you're 18, you finish high school, and you call your commanding officer by his or her first name, and you don't salute the person. One guy is in a book, he says, I've been in the Israeli army for 20 years, I think I saluted once. It's very different than here. It's a real blunt, in-your-face culture. This is not an anti-Semitic trope. That's me, by the way. I've had to be very careful. I realize my problem isn't just that I'm Jewish, it's that I'm kind of Israeli. I mean, these people will just, right in your face, this is right and this is wrong. You're in the army, you don't like your commanding officer, you complain, you're not going to get shot, they're going to replace him.
Wow.
Yeah. I've read about a herd mentality. I have not observed it. But when I did read about the kibbutz movement, everything was the collective, even for kids growing up. You hardly had time to yourself or you were considered disloyal. Highly egalitarian. Now the Arabs are just the opposite. Here's a sheikh and in fact, the Arabs, you had, again, after World War I, some of the victors, the British and the French, basically divided up the Middle East, created all these new nations, and didn't really think much about religion or Sunni versus Shiite. The Arabs lived in clans. That was a loyalty. It wasn't to a country, it was to a clan. There's some Arabic word for that. And Peter Z. Melkin, I read his book. He's the guy who captured Eichmann in Argentina. And they captured Eichmann. He was a Mossad guy. Melkin. Eichmann was the guy who was responsible for the Jewish solution, one of the men. And they brought him back to Israel. They snuck him out of Argentina. They basically drugged him or something.
They kidnapped him.
Well, they kidnapped him. They got him on a plane, got him back to Israel, tried him, hung him, I think it was. Hung him and then burned his ashes. And they didn't want to have a grave, for the German tourists to come to.
Wow.
The whole world respected it. They almost got Yosef Mengele, but Mengele must have found out, and then Mengele eventually died in a swimming pool, I think it was, stroke or something. But Mengele was the angel of death. The guy at Auschwitz, that big, tall doctor, go to the right, the left.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, But he mentioned as a kid they would play with the Arabs, and he could even tell back then there was going to be a problem. Because with the Arabs, you said something, it's going to require a response. If I insulted you or something, you're going to have to respond. And with the Jews, there was just a lot of this back and forth banter. Didn't bother them. Huge difference. Highly egalitarian, the Arabs are not, so that's part of the culture clash. Israel today has different cultures. There are housing issues. There have always been housing issues. All these Jews coming in, you can't build the houses fast enough for them. Again, if you get the movie Salah Shabati, it is, and Chaim Topol, who played, Tevi on Fiddle of the Roof, he's the patriarch there. It is in black and white in Hebrew, but subtitled in English. It's a spoof on the Israeli housing crisis because it's really there. People came in, they're leaving, they're getting out of post-war Europe, and some of them had been in DP or displaced person camps in Europe for a while, and Patton put barbed wire on them because Patton couldn't stand the Jews. Very anti-Semitic guy. And, well, actually, we had an anti-Semitic State Department. We had an anti-Semitic country during World War II. That's why we didn't want to get involved. Much of the population was German. Why fight the Germans? We are German. We didn't want to get involved with that war. Pearl Harbor got us involved. Not in the German. Well, of course, then the Germans declared war. We declared war in Japan, and so
Germany.
Yeah, Germany.
In Italy.
But because that Axis. But the thing is, people would finally make it to Israel, and they have to put them in camps again.
Jack.
They have to put them in camps because tent camps, and they could live there, a year, it might get longer, and they're frustrated, they're waiting for housing. Housing can be a real issue when you have so many people coming in, you just can't build the houses fast enough. Now, with the projector down, I'm going to continue off this. Not the projector, the computer. Ethnic makeup of Israel. I printed this out just in case. Personality of Israelis. Okay. Israel today. Okay, housing issues. Education's another issue. How are you going to educate all these people coming in? It's an issue in America today. We're saying, well, all these immigrants crashing the border, they're going to flood the schools and everything. Mm-hmm. But how are they to be educated? Mm-hmm. Now, Orthodox, Haredi, and Hasidic Judaism. You've got the Orthodox. A subset of those are Haredi. It's a subset of Orthodox Judaism. They're ultra-Orthodox, but they consider the term ultra-Orthodox to be insulting. Most of the differences between Haredi and Orthodox perspectives have to do with decisions of oral law as to how the Torah, that's the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, should be applied to a modern situation. Remember, this Talmud was written at a time when, the temple was destroyed and they had all this oral tradition, and now Judaism has to go on without sacrifices. More of a synagogue-based Judaism than a temple. It's certainly not a temple-based Judaism. So, we get this back. But the clicker isn't. Something's wrong. Okay. Can you just go to the next slide, please? Because the clicker's not working.
Is it not working?
Yeah. For whatever reason, the clicker's not working.
Is your clicker's not working?
Yeah, well, it's not changing anything. It is now.
There we go.
Okay, culture of Israel today. Ancient Israel was more colorful. These religious Jews that were black and white. There was a guy on TV in Texas, and he's an American, but a Levite. I think maybe a Kohen, from the priestly tribe. Levites are from Levi. Kohen or Kohanim, they are priests, descendants of Aaron. I forget which he is. But he's been training people for temple sacrifices, and I saw this a long time ago. He mentions that weddings there were very colorful, and they sell stuff. His organization is, they'll sell you stuff for a real old-fashioned type wedding as they used to have. And he says, the black and white and stuff, it's nice, but basically he doesn't run it down, but that's not what it was like in the old days. The old days it was very colorful. This black and white stuff, this dress code, when you see them wearing these things in their heads that you can't figure out what they are. That's because Hasidic Judaism started in Poland in the 18th century, early part of the 18th century, so that was their dress code. When you see a religious organization that wears different clothes, tends to be that when the organization started, this is what they wore. So you look at the Amish, the Mennonites, and all that stuff, or even pastors that have black and have a little white thing. When did that religion start? What were they wearing back then? It was probably those clothes. Now, okay, there it is. The Orthodox Haredi, it's a subset of Orthodox Judaism. Now, 12.9% of Israel's population and 35% of the population of Jerusalem are Haredi. Haredi, they're a subset of the Orthodox. It's projected that more than 1/3 of the population of Israel will be ultra-Orthodox by 2050. They have a high birth rate. That's the reason. The Arabs also have a high birth rate. But secular Jews, like those that live in Tel Aviv, are like us, and they're going to have maybe 3 kids, as opposed to a whole bunch. Now, the Hasidic Jews, okay, so you get the Orthodox, some of them are Haredi, and some of the Haredis are Hasidic. Hasidic Judaism is a movement within Haredi Judaism that focuses on the study of the spiritual and joyful elements of the Talmud. I mean, they're the ones that like to break out in singing and dancing. And it began in the 18th century, that's the 1700s, by Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, later known as the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name. Again, if you see the movie The Chosen, the one based on Chaim Potok's book, not this other one that they got screaming or something about Jesus. It's more emotional. Its roots are in the anti-Kabbalah movement of the 13th century, and you learn from a Rebbe. Now, it's dynastic, especially the ones like Williamsburg, New York. You got the Sarmars and other ones. Rebbe, it goes from father to son. And what it is they started out again really saying we shouldn't just be studying all the time, let's get joyful. And in Lithuania, there was a guy who managed to keep them out. But, in places like Poland, it really flourished. And these days, it's like a lot of things that start out radical, it's becoming more, the Hasidic movement and the Haredi movement aren't as different as they used to be. In other words, the mitnagdim, the opposers, those in Lithuania that said, no, we should be, never mind this emotionalism, let's stick to study. You think of Hasidic Jews as studying all the time. It originally started out as something that said, let's not just study, let's get joyful. But more and more, the Hasidim are studying, and maybe other groups are at least singing and getting a little more joyful. Like Reform Judaism in the U.S. Well, actually, Reform Judaism started in Germany, but it's become more and more, especially in the U.S., mainstream. Of course, there are hardly any Jews left in Germany. But in the U.S., it was very radical, and it's become more mainstream. So a lot of these movements start out very on the edges, very radical, and then they just kind of, Reformed synagogues, supposedly now they wear yarmulkes and everything. When I went to a Reformed synagogue, we did not. So this is often what happens to religion, too. It can get very extreme, and then it just gets a little more mainstream. Schisms. Part 1. Now this compliments of Oren, the tour guide on YouTube. He is fantastic. He has lived in Berlin. he speaks English, and he does tours in Israel, moved to a kibbutz there. The first one, schism part 1. Arabs and Jews, we already talked about it. That's a big one. Secular and Orthodox Jews, that's an internal Jewish conflict. Jewish society in Israel can be divided into 3 parts. Secular Jews, which are 45% of the Jewish population. National, religious, and traditional Jews, about 35% of the Jewish population. Women wear skirts there, and men wear crocheted kippot. The yarmulke, what's a Yiddish word? Skull cap, I never heard it as a kid. It's the English word. We call them yarmulkes. That's Yiddish, but also when we went to Hebrew school, it was kippah, 1 kippah, 2 kippot. It's plural.
So
And
kippah is the Hebrew word?
yeah, for yarmulke in Hebrew. Yarmulke is Yiddish. Hebrew it's kippah, and plural is kippot. They'll wear crochet kippot, usually with a pattern. And they're also very religious and ultra-Orthodox is a third group. That's about 20%. With the ultra-Orthodox, it's about 12%. They wear a black kippah, black hat, often a black suit. The ones with the white shirts and everything else seems to be black. Here's another schism. Jewish versus democratic schism. It's a political conflict. The ultra-Orthodox are of Eastern European background. They don't like to go into the army. Now I think they might be forcing them now. I don't know exactly how it stands. Basically they get free higher education. They pay less taxes because they have lots of children. Same in the US, that 50% of the men don't work, but study instead with the women working. This leads to poverty. Now another source says they do work. You look at different videos, you look at different sources, you hear different things. In Williamsburg, New York, by the way, the Hasidic men do work. They really do work in Williamsburg, New York. It's not the wife doing the work, she keeps home. In the Bible, the Jews worked the land of Israel. And this is what the Ohen is saying. They worked the land of Israel. Now, is the question, do we integrate Arabs and the ultra-Orthodox in the future? I mean, if the Arabs ever really become full-fledged Israeli citizens and stuff, we get this issue. Schisms part 3, the third one is the left versus the right. Today, the majority of Israelis don't believe that peace with the Palestinians is possible. They used to, and then of course they pulled out of Gaza and look what happened. They're still dodging rockets. Until the 6-Day War, it was an economic schism. Socialism versus the free market. Remember that Israel started out with all these socialistic kibbutzim, and maybe 25% of the population lived on kibbutz, especially when you first came in, get off the boat, you went to a kibbutz. And you had that schism. In the 1970s until about 10 to 15 years ago, the thing was, can we trade land for peace? And right now, Israelis don't really talk about that. It's obviously not going to work. Because they unilaterally pulled out of Gaza, and they didn't get peace. That's left versus right. Still on left versus right, now there are not large right-wing and left-wing groups, but small right-wing and small left-wing political parties. This is according to Oren, the tour guide who lives there. Israelis want peace and don't want other countries destroyed, but some countries want Israel destroyed. There really is a double standard. Israelis do not say, let us destroy Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and Egypt. The Arab Spring turned into the Islamist winter. By the way, the Arab Spring, anyone know who's funded that?
The Muslim Brotherhood.
Guess who gave them the money?
Iran, Iraq.
You, thank you, American taxpayer. A
Oh.
lot of it came from
Obama.
Obama.
Yeah, Obama.
Yeah, thank you.
Funded the brother.
American
funded the
taxpayer.
Brotherhood.
I blame you.
But they funded the Muslim Brotherhood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea was get them in a different. Well, what happened was there were a lot of brutal secular dictators that really had to go, but they were replaced by a bunch of brutal religious dictators. That was the problem. Fourth one, Sephardic versus Ashkenazi tension. It's a less serious tension than the previous 3 tensions. It's a culture clash. It does not lead to rioting on the streets and people killing each other. This tension is decreasing. They're learning to live with each other. The Ashkenazi are more extreme, ultra-Orthodox or secular. They can be one way or the other. The Hasidim are ultra-Orthodox, and you go to Tel Aviv, which is the big the big cosmopolitan area, and you go to like secular Jews. The Mizrahim are more traditional. These are people that have come from places like Yemen and places like that from the east. Ashkenazim are wealthier than Mizrahim Jews. The only instance of segregation, there are ultra-Orthodox who don't want to mix with the Sephardic Jews. If you see Shtisel, you get onto, this is what I did, and I got Netflix and I binge watched all 3 seasons of Shtisel. It's great. You want to learn their culture, you look at the movies I showed you and you look at that one, because that's modern Israel.
Wait a second.
Yeah, Shtisel. There is the issue of a Hasidic boy marrying a Sephardic Jewess. Okay, you're taking a picture, I'll get out of your way.
Okay.
And again, why Sephardic and Mizrahi are used interchangeably, it's just a confusing thing, because the Sephardic Jews, when they were kicked out of the Iberian Peninsula, they went to these Arab countries that were already Mizrahi Jews, so they intermarried there, and people don't always understand the difference, and there often isn't a difference. It's, which one are you? Now, Ashkenazi Jews, you can usually tell they're different because of where they came from. Let's say Poland, Lithuania, Russia, places like that. But historically, this expulsion in the late 15th century, the late 1400s, caused a lot of Jews from Spain and Portugal to end up in places where Arab Jews, sometimes call them, were already living. Part 5, Tel Aviv and the rest of Israel. That's another schism. Tel Aviv is the big cosmopolitan city of Israel. It's more open to the world. They say while Jerusalem prays, Tel Aviv plays. Tel Aviv and cities to the north are like that. And they don't have broken windows of violence between these groups. Reform and conservative, I will say that there were incidences when I was in Israel, my second time, of Israeli Hasidic Jews throwing rocks at cars traveling in the Sabbath. So the no broken windows might not be completely true. They'd say, we don't want you traveling in the Sabbath, and they throw rocks at your car. They throw rocks at you. You go, okay, Sabbath starts Friday evening and ends Saturday evening. So if you go Saturday evening to buy a movie ticket, if you're there a few minutes early and they open up the window a few minutes early, they might throw a rock at you. Now by the way, I had rocks thrown at me 3 times. They were Arabs. 2 or 3 times. And I'll say 2 or 3, because twice was aimed at me, or me and someone I was with. And one time, it was me, a French girl, and an Israeli soldier with a Zuzi in that well where you walk down the stairs, in the middle of the desert, and there we are at the water table, and a rock came down, and I think the Israeli soldier really wanted to shoot him. I mean, he didn't say, I'm going to kill you, but he was mad. And the French girl started arguing with him in Hebrew. With the, look at what you do to the Arabs. Anyway, but yeah, you get a lot of stones thrown there.
When we were in Israel, where were we? What valley? What was that, Mary? When we were going to go bury those mementos we took with us. It was the
Hades.
Yeah, the Hades. What is it?
Where they
Sheol, the valley.
Oh,
there in Jerusalem.
Where they.
It's the area of Sheol, Hades, whatever.
No, not the Kidron Valley.
No, not the
Azael Valley of, they call it Azael, means like hell.
Yeah.
They used to have a constantly burning dump there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, we had taken some mementos from various people in our church that we were going to bury in the ground in Israel. And we climbed this stone wall and went over there underneath an olive tree to do it. And this Arab kid across the street came down yelling and started throwing rocks at us.
It's Gehenna.
Yeah, Gehenna.
Gehenna,
The
yeah.
Valley of Hinnom.
Yeah,
Gehenna,
yeah.
the Valley of Hinnom.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something about this. Was so amazing because the little boy who threw it
He's about
was
10,
so
12 years
far
old.
away.
Yeah, I know.
Think about how your sight looks smaller as distant. I'm not exaggerating. From where we were, he looked this big. That's how far away we were from this little boy. He looked that small from how far we were, and he threw that rock so accurately it landed this right in front of me on the sidewalk. At that distance, it was that accurate.
Wow.
Practice. You read Thomas Friedman's book, From Beirut to Jerusalem. He was a reporter from the U.S. He had to clear out of Beirut because it was getting, when a 50 millimeter machine gun goes off in your hotel roof, it's time to leave. But he's met some interesting people over there. He's written a lot of books too. He talks about his kids. They're going somewhere and an Arab throws a rock and breaks the car window. But I think he also mentioned that the Arabs, they throw like this. Now, we know from playing football and baseball, you throw like this. The Arab boys might not know, and they throw like this. Because think of what they're playing. They're not playing baseball, and they're not playing football. What we call football, they're playing soccer. Okay? So they're not as good at throwing. In our sports, we have to throw. Baseball, softball, American football. When you're doing soccer, what do you throw like this if something goes out of bounds or if you're a goalie? But they can throw rocks and they can hurt. Reform and conservative Judaism. Reformed Jews focus on the concept of ethical monotheism. They believe that only the ethical laws of the Torah are binding. They believe that other laws, like those laws in the Talmud, were products of their time and place, and so it was not necessary to treat them as absolute. Remember, conservative Judaism came later. Reform Judaism started in Germany, moved to the U.S. And then in the U.S. later, you had conservative Judaism as sort of a middle-of-the-road type of thing. We're not going to be as radical as the Reform, but neither as observant as the Orthodox. And again, you probably see this in Christianity too. Denominations and all that. The culture of Israel today. I swear and obligate myself on my word of honor to remain loyal to the state of Israel, its laws and its legitimate administration, and to devote all of my strength and even to sacrifice my life in defense of the homeland and the freedom of Israel. You're taking your oath as a soldier. By tradition, some inductees to the Israeli Defense Forces, also called the IDF, take their oath of loyalty to the Jewish state on top of Masada. We saw people, I was in Masada, and you could see the soldiers coming up Masada. And it was so funny because, Americans always march like you see the Marines and everything. They're just walking up like a bunch of Boy Scouts. Again, there's much less formality. Others take it at the Western Wall, the remnant of the sacred temple in Jerusalem. But wherever they take it, the oath ends, Masada shall not fall again. Again, that holdout against the Romans that fell in 70 A.D., by really mass suicide. Think that 1 or 2 women hid them and their kids, and that's how they found out what had really happened. Remember, it was kind of, the Alamo was different. It wasn't suicide, but they did let some women live. Okay, to go spread the message, you don't mess with us Mexicans. But anyway, and I've seen it a long time ago on TV, ani nishpa, which means I swear. Ani nishpa, ani nishpa. I guess they say it 3 times afterwards. I'll have to watch that whenever we go back there. And there's the Western Wall. Probably the majority taken on top of Masada. The religious ones might do it at the Western Wall. And that's Masada. Ceremony of receiving berets in Masada. The IDF
That's cool.
called battalion. Okay. Yes, women now can go into active combat. Again, they had some mass rape and murder in one of their earlier wars, and they said, we're drafting the women, but they're not going to fight anymore. From what I understand, they're going into active combat just like our women are doing now. The culture of Israel is more athletic than among Jews abroad. American Jewish culture, I know we got some professional Jewish athletes, but not according to our percentage of the U.S. population. Jews will play football in high school and stuff, and by college, they don't care anymore. I know. I grew up in that culture. What was drilled in my mind was you're going to college. And that wasn't even a question. It was, what college are you going to? Are you going to get into Harvard? Are you going to med school? Not going to college is a heresy. And it's like everyone wants their kids to be doctors, lawyers, dentists. I saw one Jewish lady telling another Jewish lady, I assume the second lady was Jewish, my 2 sons are dentists. Boy, if we could all be that lucky or something like that. This is right in front of me. And that's the, But it is more of an athletic culture. You have to be, in a sense, when you're all going to be in the military. It is now high tech. It didn't start out that way. High tech now, and its workers make the best wages. Diaspora Jews support Israel, and Israel supports diaspora Jews. I say, diaspora Jews are people that don't live in Israel. By the way, if you look at history, including the Khmelnytsky uprising, 1645 in Ukraine and all that, and all these people that now had to try to find a new place to live that survived that. Jews help Jews and have for centuries and centuries. Again, it's a very egalitarian culture. When I was doing my postdoctoral fellowship with the USDA in Beltsville, Maryland, there was an Israeli grandmother doing her postdoc because her husband had taught for 14 years as a professor without a sabbatical. So he had 2 years of sabbatical. And his first year was in the US, so she was there. And then she had to leave because her husband was going to Switzerland for a year. We didn't have a car. My wife and I had flown. We had lived in Alaska, didn't have a car up there either. Sold our car to go to Alaska, lived up there for a while, flew to my parents in Massachusetts for a couple of weeks, then flew to DC. And we didn't have a car. We were suffering from both suffering from multiple student loan complex to the tune of $900 a month total.
Oh, gosh.
The Israeli woman says, "I can't believe your parents didn't give you a car." They eventually did later, and then another one. But actually, after my father died, we got another one, but not the car he left behind. Good thing, because then we had babies, and that was a Lexus, and why ruin a good Lexus with Similac vomit and everything else? But it's just Jews. They don't take care of Jews. I mean, there were Jews starving to death in Jerusalem a long time ago, and Jews would send money to help them, like widows and stuff. This was a long time ago. And Arab hostility is still a threat. Yeah, there are some Arabs and Jews that work side by side in Israel. So you see this video, oh, look, and we get along. Yeah, well, that's not the whole country. It's certainly not the West Bank. But there are Arabs and Jews working side by side. Here's a confrontation. This was when they said, okay, we're moving y'all out of Gaza. We're giving it back to the Arabs. And this was one particular confrontation when the Israeli soldiers go in and the Jews don't want to leave. So now you've almost got a civil war. And I don't know if it's just the people from that particular place or there were other people that came in to help them, other Jews that came in solidarity. Huge confrontations when the Israeli soldiers had to go against other Jews and pull them out. Treatment of the Palestinians, hot button issue. Let me have a drink before to cool myself down.
When they forced them out of Gaza, did those people have to walk away from homes that they owned?
Yeah.
Did the Israeli government
I think they gave money for it.
pay for it and,
I
and
believe
buy
so.
and pay for the stuff?
But money's not really the issue there. The settlements in Gaza, they're generally religious Jews. Even in the West Bank. And so this God gave us this land, we're not leaving it. And how can you, soldiers, you Jews, force us out? You're worse than you're like the Nazis. Of course, the Nazis were worse. The Nazis originally just drove the Jews east and then started killing them off. Here's a hot button issue, and I'm going to take it on. And if you don't like it, don't blame this church that I'm speaking at, and don't blame the church I go to. This is Howard Merkin speaking. It's a hot button. Bernard Lewis, a British-American historian of Oriental studies, he says Muslims must conquer what was theirs. In other words, the Muslims did own that land, and so they have to get it back, according to Bernard Lewis. He's also an author. You think, look at the Old Testament, Joshua, drive them out. Actually, the Bible usually didn't say kill them out, but drive them out. What happened in the Shehut? I was in a Shehut, which is a long-distance taxi. Now, these days, as I've looked at films about Israel, YouTube, they have vans for taxis. In those days, they just had cars, but they had these limousines called a Shehut, which means service, by the way. It's also, Shehutim is plural, that also means bathroom. If you say, where's in Hebrew, where's the she'utim, it means I got to, where's the bathroom? But it means service. And it was more of a long distance thing. You could, a day in advance, you say to a she'ut driver, can you meet us at a certain place? We have to get across this country or something. And driven by Arabs in those days in their long white robes and everything. Now, we're in a she'ut, and it's me, a couple of friends. And you got something called a machsum. It's kind of like, it's this metal thing, almost looks like an accordion. You pull it out, I guess, and it's got spikes, and it's a roadblock, a checkpoint. And it's got spikes in case you think you're going to knock it over. So I can remember, I think that was the time when you get stopped after stop, and one guy just got sick of it. The she'ut driver just went around one of them. But I can remember one where there's Israeli, looks at us, the Israeli soldier at that checkpoint, he says, in English, why did you use an Arab driver? Why don't you use a Jewish driver? And at that point I saw the problem. We here in America have had to learn American Indians and blacks are not inferior. Okay? It took us a long time to learn that. Obviously, I'm from America and I'm listening to this. It's like, mister, this is what we're just getting away from in my country. I didn't say a thing. I didn't know what to say. Lady beside me said, Zelo hashuv, Zelo hashuv. It doesn't matter. Literally means it's not important, but they also, when you want to say it doesn't matter, that's what you say. She said it twice. She was an American. And at that point I could see what the problem was. They're treating the Palestinians the way we used to treat blacks and American Indians, and still do in some parts. Okay? And the Gaza pullout, from Gaza, they're rocketing Israel. Actually, other places are rocketing Israel now. So, you can't just pull out of the West Bank and expect them to live happily ever after next to the Israelis. It's a real problem. What do you do? And interesting, Gaza was the land of the Philistines. The West Bank is the biblical heartland, what they call the West Bank. He used to call it Judea and Samaria in the newspapers, and then it became the West Bank, and then it became the Israeli-occupied territories, and now it's often just the occupied territories. If you actually follow newspapers over the years. But Gaza, the Philistines gave Israel the fits, and it's the same thing today. Syria is an implacable enemy of Israel, and they were back in the Bible. Egypt wasn't all that much of an enemy of Israel in Bible days once they got out. And they're not, yes, they have, 1960, they had problems with them in the past, but right now it's not too much of a problem. Egypt was the first Arab country to sign a peace treaty with Israel. So you see these old hostilities from thousands of years ago, and it's like the same locations, the same regions. West Bank is a biblical heartland, so a lot of Jews some Jews say, let's just compromise. Well, they used to say, we'll give them that, it's a compromise, we'll have peace. And now after Gaza, no one's talking about peace anymore. Comments I've heard from Christians. A pastor in Israel, speaking English, they ought to just get out. Those are probably the exact words, from what I can remember. Palestinians. Okay, here's another one, much more recent. I have no use for the Palestinians. This was a Christian woman. Another Christian woman telling me, you liberal Jews. She's Jewish herself. Well, she called me a cheap Jew in Bible school. And she's just like me, Jewish ethnicity Christian.
She called you what?
She called me a cheap Jew once. Because,
cheap Jew? Oh.
Yeah, here's the reason. We were going out to evangelize, and it was a hot night, and we're on a bus. And I said, I'm going to go get a soda. We were stopping for gas or something. And it's a hot night, and it's 40 cents for a can of soda. And back in those days, I was lucky to have money for laundry. So I see a water fountain, and so I go back in the bus. She expected me to buy soda and share with her. So she said, where's the soda? I said, why should I pay 40 cents for a can of soda when the water fountain is free? She said, you cheap Jew. But she's Jewish herself. She was a friend. But she really, I was talking about treatment of the Palestinians. Oh, you liberal Jews. Well, I'm Jewish, but I'm not liberal. Here's the problem. Okay? Now, why did the Jews annex the West Bank in 1967? Anyone know?
Wait. Why didn't Israel annex the West Bank?
In 1967.
Annex it.
Yeah, in other words, they conquered the West Bank. Let's make it part of Israel.
That was the 6-Day War, right?
Yeah, 6-Day War.
And that's when they got a hold of it. So why didn't they annex it?
Yeah, or annex it.
Why
Why didn't they?
Huh.
Anyone know? It would have been part of Israel. They just conquered it. Because the Arabs, the Jews would have been a minority in their own land.
The population, right?
Yeah, the Arabs have this high birth rate. You annexed the West Bank back then before all these Russian Jews came in, most of them. They would have been, the Israeli Jews would have been a minority in Israel. So they didn't annex it. They didn't know what to do with it. They still don't know what to do with it. So they administer the West Bank. So it's theirs, but it's not theirs. That's the problem. They've been sitting on the Arabs there since 1967, and no one really, everyone's got their opinion on what to do, but nothing works.
So they want, the idea of the people living there is just give us back all the land. Even though you technically own the land, give it back to us. Is there ongoing friction?
Well, here's the thing. If you create a Palestinian state, now you've got what they know is a terror state because of what happened in Gaza. And it kind of chokes Israel. If you actually look at Israel on a map, that West Bank, creates a choke point. But if you make them citizens, then you're outnumbered. At least back in those.
What about today?
Today, I forget the exact numbers now. It might be close. But I think they figure they can't live with them anyway. Actually, after 1967, there was some type of a friendship. They thought they were going to have problems, and the biggest problems was like traffic control. I read in one thing. It's just all these Arabs coming into Israel and stuff to visit relatives or whatever. But it was the first intifada that showed that they really weren't kissing cousins. And years ago, there were some Israelis that didn't want to serve in the West Bank. A lot of them wanted a Palestinian state. This was before they pulled out of Gaza and realized this isn't going to work. But there were Israelis that said, you're drafting us, I will not go into the West Bank. That is not my place. We don't belong there. I refuse. So here's where you can do this without getting shot. Now, how do you think mistreatment of the local populace will bring peace? Think of what happens in America when police kill somebody. Getting the riots. Israelis can win wars, but can they keep the peace? They don't know what to do with the West Bank. That's the problem. You annex it, you're now bringing a whole bunch of Arabs into your country. Even if you're not a minority, you're bringing in a lot of people that might be very hostile to you.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's a real problem.
Let it become its own state, you risk a terror state. And a choke point, again, if you look at a map. So you continue to administer it, and that doesn't work. So nothing's working. Nothing can work.
As long as they maintain control of that, they have a defensive barrier of the Jordan Rift Valley, from enemies coming out of the east. Tanks can't very well maneuver in that area.
See, it's like an impossible situation. John the Baptist and Jesus Christ yelled at people. But what was the context? You ever hear people Christian preachers that say, well, we're being too soft, blah, 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 or too soft on sin. Jesus Christ yelled at people. John the Baptist yelled at people. John the Baptist lost his head for, something he said. What was the context? Jesus is yelling at people who could see the miracles he was doing right in front of them and not believe. John the Baptist was dealing with these same types of people that had taken what God gave them and just perverted it. Now, not in the sense of pagan perversion like sex changes, but, religious perversion.
Hypocrisy.
Yeah, here's the thing. Can we really do that today? Number one in our preaching is contextualization. How can you go into a synagogue? You Jews killed Christ. They could do that. Stephen could do stuff like that when he saw the actual people that had said, crucify him. Can't do that anymore. They're all dead. And so what you're dealing with is people that get very emotional and don't think it, oh, you know, a lot of Christians, you know, they ought to just get out. Excuse me, they've been living there for a long time. You want the American Indians to come and take your home and have the government back it up? If it's Palestinian land, now here's what happens. Israeli soldiers go into the West Bank and they bully the Palestinians. If it's Palestinian land, why are Israeli soldiers bullying the Palestinians? And if it's part of Israel, why are Israeli soldiers bullying the people living there? You see, you can't win in a sense. Israelis, they can be real bullies when it comes to the Palestinians. And their idea is if we sit on them, they won't bother us. This was the Old Testament viewpoint that you see, like King David. Okay? How did we conquer a hemisphere? Or, of course, I'm a third generation American. This whole hemisphere was taken from its right, I mean, its rightful owners. It's the people that were here. We drove them out. Now, you think in the prisons, blacks are incarcerated more than anybody? No, it's Native Americans. The highest incarceration rate in this country, and we have the highest incarceration rate in the world and the most prisoners in the world, much of it due to drugs. It can be a non-violent offense, but you were caught with too much drugs. They have the highest incarceration rate of all ethnic groups in the U.S. You know, is the narrative ever going to change? The narrative kind of goes like this. The Jews came to an empty country. A people without a land for a land without a people. But that's not true. It was, and I showed earlier that that's not true. There were Arabs living here. That's why you had to drive them out of 400 villages. Again, I've talked about that before. Now with something that resembles our Freedom of Information Act, you can go and hear what they were saying back in 1948 and 1949. And it was basically drive them out. It wasn't kill them all. You know, you can't not convict the Israelis of genocide. If they were trying to kill all the Arabs, they're doing a terrible job because the Arab population is like, I think, tripled in the West Bank since 1967. It's not genocide. Every now and then, you know, there's rioters and Israeli shoots a rubber bullet, maybe kills a kid. Oh, you're trying to genocide us. No. If they were trying to genocide you, you wouldn't be here to complain about it. But there is a lot of tension and there's real bullying like I ran into. You don't, you know, Bernd Vollschläger, he was the son of a Nazi war hero. He started getting involved with Jews over in Germany. And this is after the war. His father finally kicked him out of the house. He became a physician, went to Israel, and married an Israeli, eventually got divorced. But he converted to Jew. I forget the exact order. I heard him speak in San Antonio, and I heard him do even better on YouTube. And I'll say do better. His English is pretty good. And he's got something on YouTube. But he went to Israel, and the last I heard, I heard him speak in San Antonio. He was practicing physician in Florida. Very good English, by the way. And he had to learn Hebrew over there in Israel, and obviously German's his native language. And the thing is, he said that in the early 1980s, Chancellor Willy Brandt started to change the narrative. With all this people were just ignoring the Holocaust. And Brandt put it to the front. And if we get to deal with this. And the narrative changed. Here's the narrative you hear to this day. We Israelis, we Jews came. The Arabs then saw that we were developing the land well, and they came. You know, the British made it nice, the Israelis made it nice, and all these Arabs came from all these different countries. That's not the whole story. There were Arabs living here. And yes, a lot of them came because of a good economy, and partly because of the British and the Israelis. But it wasn't just, you know, I was telling my wife about this morning. The problem is we see everything in black and white, and it's not like that. Okay, the real world is color. It's all kinds of shades in between. The narrative has got to change. Israelis have a false narrative that they came to an empty country, and that all these Arabs here just kind of came in afterwards and maybe they ought to leave again, something like that. Sort of like we were here first bit. It was not an empty country. It was a poorly taken care of country, as far as some of it goes. But they had, absurd. They had trade routes. They had a lot going for them here. Here in Israel. And yeah, some of that was after the British and Israelis came, but they had a culture that goes back. My prison experience and training, okay? Now I work in a state prison for felons. I have no weapons but mace. It's the most powerful mace probably they make. And that's when I'm doing a security shift. I'm a counselor 5 days a week. Sometimes I do security shifts also. I lock myself in a building with 50 to 54 felons that can get out of their cells. I'm locked in. They could kill me in a moment's notice. What, I've got mace? They come after me? And I got a body alarm so they can find me after I'm dead or beaten up. That's true. We all do that, by the way. It's security. I mean, we all got those risks. We are told, be fair, firm, and consistent. You got to be fair to them. You can't treat one prisoner better than another. You got to be firm. They're there because they didn't keep the rules. And you got to be consistent. Even the prisoners tell you, you're going to be, I won't use the exact terminology, you're going to be nice one day and a jerk the next day. Don't do that. Be a jerk every day or be nice every day. They got to know what to expect from you. By the way, okay, I locked myself in a building with 50-odd felons. Israeli soldiers are far better armed than that. Why do they have to bully people? I don't. I go in and I treat those felons with respect. Okay? Maybe not bully the Palestinians in the West Bank. How come we treat imprisoned convicted felons with more respect than Israeli soldiers treat free, innocent people? I'm not saying who's got the right to the land. I'm speaking from a humanistic point of view. You think you got, I know these Palestinians, shoot, stab, send rockets on you. Too bad we don't have a take your friend to work day. Okay, this again.
Here it goes.
Oh. Okay, so I think it's here. You know, when you're a teacher, it's so good to hear a student or a parent saying, you really taught me something, you helped me. I can remember a student that I had at a Christian school, and he wrote me, or maybe it was his mother, you so helped my kid. It really makes you feel good. I mean, I'm just teaching math there. Any parent, any teacher, even the parents, compliment you when you're a teacher. It merely makes you feel good. I have been told that we're supposed to treat them with respect. When I go into a pod and they say, I'm glad you're RCO today, that means correctional officer. Because I have treated them with respect in the past. That really makes you feel good. It means you're doing the right thing. Now, you can't let them get away with anything. But when you honestly hear, and they're not trying to butter you up, that they're glad you're the CO, because I've treated them with respect. I think we should have an exchange program with Israel. Okay, we had ALICE training in a Christian school I taught at. That means alert, lockdown, inform, counter, evacuate. And it's not necessarily in that order, but it's what to do if an active shooter comes in. We even train with the kids. We give them like sponges, to throw when the principal walks in. Instead of books and laptops, we hand them sponges. This is what you do. And the principal and someone else had to go and learn from American ex-GIs and stuff like that. Here's the problem. As we were practicing this, they told the kids, when you evacuate, you go across this ball field and you go into the woods. Well, to me, wait a minute. You ever seen actual pictures from like school shootings? People are hiding behind cars. That's what you do. You're going through this parking lot, hide behind a car, hide under a car. Don't walk across a field for 100, 200 yards. Someone might think it's a shooting gallery. It had its weaknesses. But of course, we're learning from Americans. Why should we learn how to secure schools from Americans when we can't secure our schools? Last mass shooting in Israel in a school was 1974. Matlot.
Really?
Terrorists. Moshe Dayan was there. He was right beside somebody who was shot dead right beside him. But they have had 2 attempts since then where the teachers or whoever was able to stop them because they're armed in their schools. Now, there might have been more. This is something I read a couple of years ago, and of course, things keep happening. They know how to secure their schools, we don't. So instead of listening to American GIs who can't secure, actually, if we let a bunch of them in our schools, they probably could secure them. But, instead of listening to Americans who can't do it, let's send them to Israel and learn how to do it. Now, and then the Israelis can send people here to learn from our prison wardens or the people that teach us how to be COs, how to treat people with respect. Because the Israeli soldiers don't seem to know. From anything I've seen or read, they don't seem to know that. I'm sure some do. I might be painting with a broad brush, but what happened in the Shehud taught me, man, you can't do this. Now they do. If they're going to destroy a home in Gaza because they've been shooting rockets out of the home, they'll go and drop leaflets. We're going to destroy your home. Get out of here. So they do actually treat people better than any other army in the world does. But they're still, when they go into the West Bank, they can bully people at the same time. They can tell people in Gaza that we're going to bomb your house, get out. But they can also bully people in the West Bank. There's got to be some more consistency. Daryl Davis is a black guy, and he went to Ku Klux Klan meetings. He's got a collection of KKK uniforms that people have turned over to him. He'll go to the meeting and basically show that he's human just like they are. And some of them drop out.
Is Daryl Davis black?
Yeah, Daryl Davis is black. Catch him on YouTube. And it takes guts to go to a KKK meeting when you're black. He's done that. And he's got a collection of people just quit the Klan. They talk with him. They realize he's human just like they are. Here's the thing for us as Christians now. If we run down the Arabs, I have no use for the Palestinians. They ought to just get out. How are you going to preach to them? How did Jesus treat the woman at the well? He had to correct her on some stuff, but he didn't call her some things that we might have wanted to call her. John Hyrcanus destroyed the Samaritan temple in 129 BC. Okay? In the city of Shechem in 109 BC. The Samaritans defiled the temple of the Jerusalem sanctuary in AD 8. They had war. He wasn't just talking to someone of a different ethnicity. Maybe you're part Jewish and part, whoever these Syrians brought down or whatever. There had been, when he's talking to her, he's talking to someone who can remember, probably from AD 8 certainly, these groups really didn't get along to whatever those warfare. So John Hyrcanus decided, now he was the son, it was Judah the Maccabee, and 5 brothers, and one of them was Simon, and he had a son, John Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus the first, we call him, because 2 generations later there's another Hyrcanus. But he was going to expand the borders of Israel, and he went into Idumea or Edom, whatever you want to call it. It should be called Edom. It is in the Bible. And basically forcibly converted Edomites, so hence the Haredi clan, claiming to be Jewish. And he really forcibly converted people, which Jews typically don't do. But he was kind of being like King David was. So, to this day, there is a cult, if you want to call it that, called the Samaritans, and they do sacrifice, but it's on Mount Gerizim, but they don't, it's just an open altar. I saw a picture in National Geographic. They don't have a temple anymore. So he's talking to her. There's warfare in their history. From Acts 1, when they therefore were come together, they asked of him, saying, Lord, This is right before the ascension. Wilt thou at this time restore again the kingdom of it to Israel? We're asking that question all the time now. And there's reason to believe that's true soon. And he said unto them, it is not for you to know the times of the seasons, which the Father hath put in his own power. But ye shall receive power after that the Holy Ghost is come upon you, and ye shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem, and in all Judea, and in Samaria, and unto the uttermost part of the earth. That is what we have to do as Christians. We know, a lot of us believe, put it this way, that soon the kingdom, Jesus Christ will come back physically and restore the kingdom to Israel. But that's not our job now. As much as I'm pro-Zionist, as much as I speak about the Jewish background of the Bible, as much as I read Jewish history, on and on, it is not for me to run down any group we're supposed to be preaching to them. That's where Christians fall apart. They let their politics get in the way. I'm a Christian, not first in time, I grew up Jewish, but foremost. So my attitude and actions must be one of a New Testament saint, period. I will not let politics or even my Zionism compromise my testimony of the gospel. I will not let it compromise my Christianity. Remember the 1980s? Jerry Falwell, get him saved, baptized, and registered. No, that is not what the Bible says. It is rather in Matthew 28, go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. That's Matthew 28, 19 to 20. We let our politics get in there and it gets divisive, and we compromise our testimony at times. I'm not saying don't vote. This guy is going to disagree with me, and he's got that right. Okay, Mordechai Kedah from Bar Ilam University, the Muslim mind. He just said, how the Muslims just want to destroy Israel, and that's that. So I'm not saying that my opinion is absolutely right, but I am coming from a viewpoint of a Christian, which he isn't. Must I make aliyah? This, by the way, is French. I don't know if they're from France or Canada, because that's French there. Aliyah, in the four corners of the earth. They're arriving in Israel. This was suggested to me. Why don't you come? Well, I get kids that are, they can come and learn Hebrew. And wait a minute. This is from a Hebrew Christian living there. As a Christian, God can tell me to go to one place and you to go to another place. I don't have to go to Israel just because I'm Jewish. Because now you've got almost two gospels. The Gentiles can do wherever God leads them, but the Jews have to go to, even the saved Jews have to go to Israel. You understand that? Okay? If God tells me to move to Israel, that's one thing. But I do not have to make aliyah or immigrate to Israel. Conclusion to this whole series, part 1. Now, Peter was casting a net in Matthew 4:18. That represents the first stage of the church, mass evangelism. You have to win people. The ministry of Paul was more of, he certainly evangelized, but you don't see the thousands one at one time like you do with Peter. He understood that we're a body of Christ. He really knew theology and how to confront Peter. John was found mending in that. You read the Gospels when these are called. Peter and his brother Andrew and James and John. John was mending in that. Remember, in Revelation 2:4-5, we see a church that is lost. Ephesus has lost its first love. Now, of course, this is Jesus talking from heaven. But John had his ministry late in life. There is recovery. In other words, you win a lot. You have them understand we're in the body of Christ. And then sometimes you have to repair things. Things start to fall apart. There are 3 main ministries, in a sense, with the church. Okay? We have to repair the altar. 1 Kings 18:30. Elijah had to repair the altar. That was his confrontation with the prophets of Baal. And he said he had to repair the altar. And the church That's kind of like John. The altar's fallen, guys. You've lost your first love. You got all the programs, Ephesus, but you've lost your first love. And this actually was Jesus talking to John, the angel of the church of Ephesus. But you can see three main ministries in a sense: evangelizing, giving people good theology, having them understand that you're a part of the body of Christ. And then, well, here's where things have fallen apart. Let's get back to where we were before. Chiasms, introverted parallelism. Genesis 3:9-17. Adam blames the woman blames the serpent. So God goes in the opposite order. He curses the serpent, the woman, and Adam. There are maybe 2,000 of these in the Bible. The book of Judges, the 7 major judges in the book of Judges is present, and it's in order. Talk about God's providence. It's a chiastic structure. The first is much like the 7th, the second is much like the 6th, the third is much like the 5th, although often in opposites as they go downhill. The first has a godly father-in-law. Samson had an ungodly father-in-law. On and on. I got a whole page on that stuff. Plenty of it. You ever wonder if church history is a chiasm? Jewish history is a chiasm? Here's the thing. The church started out being persecuted by the Jews, and the Romans sometimes protected them. You read Acts. Now I understand in Acts 12, Herod, which was actually Herod Agrippa I, not the King Agrippa of later on in Acts, that was his son, Herod Agrippa II. Herod, killed James, the brother of John, and he took Peter. The Roman Empire wasn't always protecting the church, but basically, as you see how they treated Paul and everything, they were protecting him. The Jews were out killing Christians. Paul, for instance, killing him, imprisoning them, whatever, trying to kill Paul. Maybe not killing a whole lot of Christians, but some. Or at least trying to. They certainly wanted to kill Paul. The Jews were a powerful enemy of the church, and the Romans were protecting them. But then these Roman empires got increasingly diluted, and thinking they're gods, these Caesars. And they really started persecuting Christians. Then the first temple was destroyed, and the Jews lost most of their power. We've gone through 2,000 years of church history where the Jews have not had a lot of power, and it's been generally the state that's been persecuting. Now, I understand in Muslim countries it's the Muslims, but Islam is their political philosophy. It's not just a religion. They don't know anything about separation of church and state. That's an American idea. How do you get 13 colonies together when they have different religions in each colony? You say, okay, Congress, the federal government, isn't going to legislate religion. State governments did for a while after that, because it was just simply Congress couldn't do it. But while Muslims have made it hard on Christians, generally it's been, communism, vicious enemy of Christians. It's the state. Now, it seems like it's a chiasm. Israel is the hot spot. After the 1967 war, a teacher said, because this was in Vietnam was hot. I mean, the next year, 1968, was the worst year for Vietnam. We lost 15,000 people. That was the year Martin Luther King was shot, Bobby Kennedy was shot, Kent State was that year. But he said, keep your eyes on Israel. He was very, this is public school, he had to say it like that. What's really mattering isn't Ukraine as much, it's Israel. The Jews are getting more and more political, military power, and right now, the religious Jews are becoming a larger percentage of the Israeli population, therefore putting more people in the Knesset. As Israel now again seems to be getting more religious, actually is becoming more religious all in all, because a higher percentage of people are religious there because of the high birth rates of the religious Jew, the ultra-Orthodox. And it seems like they might be, now there's a lot of tolerance. Remember Jews for Jesus having an office in Tel Aviv and a camp in the Galilee. But right now there's there was some talk of illegalizing, talking about Christianity, at least I think if you're under 18. Netanyahu is against that. He wants the freedom, but the religious coalition doesn't. They just want to shut down Christianity. Israel is becoming very powerful now. They are, at a time Israel used to have power, and then they were destroyed in pretty much 70 AD, at least Jerusalem. The Bar Kokhba revolt, which ended in 135 AD, that pretty well cleared out Jews out of most of Jerusalem and much of the country. It's now going the other way. It's the opposite. A higher percentage of Jews now live in Israel. There are more Jews living in Israel. It's becoming powerful. They probably get the best, man for man, they got the best military. We could probably beat them because we got so many more people. Very high tech, very controversial, and church history itself could be sort of a chiasm. The church started out very small. It expanded. It took over, politically, it took over much of Europe, eventually Russia with the Orthodox Church. It's losing power now. You see those two chiasms. Church now starting to lose power. Jews that have lost their power are now becoming more powerful. Do you see two chiasms? What does that tell you? That's the big picture. Never mind trying to predict the date of the second advent. In fact, I'll tell you when the second advent is going to be. Okay. I have survived so many raptures, it makes me angry to think we Christians make such fools of ourselves.
Mean you're going to hell because it came and you didn't go?
I must be. I missed the rapture of 1981. I missed the 88. I think 89. Actually, 1975 there was a predicted rapture. Rosh Hashanah 1975. I missed a bunch of them. Now, here's the thing. The church grew more powerful. It seems to be losing its power. And I know that seems to contradict what I said about Falwell and everything. It's a very divisive time. The Jews lost their power, and now they're getting it back. We got two chiasms. That's what tells me things might be coming to an end soon. The second advent. Excuse me, my throat's drying. It's because we got two simultaneous chiasms. The church chiasm and the Jewish chiasm. We're going back to where the church isn't as popular and the Jews are getting a whole lot of power. And I'm not against that. You say, oh, the Jews doing that. Come on, I'm saying Jewish people. I mean, in Israel. It's going to military. Even the Arabs know they can't beat them. They've given up on that one. And it's not just because America will defend them. We got two chiasms going on at the same time, it appears to me. Did God's work as the church age started? As the church age started, go from the Jews, they were initially powerful. The early church was either completely or mostly Jewish, to the Christians, initially persecuted. And our events in the world going back again as Israel becomes more powerful and as the church becomes more persecuted before the second coming of Christ brings it all together. You ever think of that? And what does that mean for us?
Do you have an answer?
I'll let you think about it. What does that mean for us? It seems we have two simultaneous chiasms which put things in a bigger perspective than, okay, Kabbalism, I remember reading about Kabbalism when I was in Hebrew school. You had these guys that would draw magic circles in the sand. Jewish scholars from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And then they'd also, because Hebrew letters have numerical value, they tell you why the Messiah is coming next year. Christians are guilty of, we got our own type of Kabbalism. We do, which is why you get all these books about why Jesus is coming back in all these years and he hasn't come back yet. I'm not mocking the second advent. I'm saying we are guilty of the same stupid thing. And, but really...
Well, as we become more intensely persecuted, it is a main indicator of Christ's return. because
Yeah.
he said we would be.
Yeah, that's true
You
too.
know, when they drag you into the synagogues, whatever, the Holy Spirit will give you what you need to say. That is, he said, this is coming in the end time. So the more that becomes true, the more we realize we are in the end times. The second advent is coming soon and could come within our lifetime.
But here's the thing. It's true. That's the thing. You've got these two simultaneous chiasms, so without trying to predict dates by numerical, all this junk that goes around and still comes around, even with, now I don't know what I can say about this. It doesn't have to do with Jewish history, but the shootings in Nashville, at that school, was in Nashville.
Yeah.
One guy on YouTube, he's saying, and I think they call him rabbi, but he's preaching Christianity, so I guess he's a Hebrew Christian. You know, these Messianic congregations often call their leader rabbi. And I hate to bring this up. You know, 3 9-year-olds are killed. He's saying the devil inverts everything. It's really 666. And 3 people in their 60s were killed. It just goes a little too far. But he does bring in that the paganism involved with this, with sex changes. He shows a picture of the god or goddess or something, and there's something with a knife. This goes back a long time. Sex changes, and of course the person who did that was transitioning from a woman to a man. But we get these numbers, like I say, joy, Jesus, others, you. That's not what it means, folks. I had it in French class, joie.
Jesus
Obviously,
what? Other what?
Jesus, others, joy is Jesus, others, you. You put Jesus first, others second, you third. No, that's not joy, folks. First of all, that's not where the word comes from. Secondly, when I put others before myself, I have been stomped on too many times. I mean, I do a lot for the gospel, but always putting others ahead of me has gotten me stomped on in other friends of mine.
Yeah.
We just come up with all these stupid things, so we always come up setting dates. That's the point. Don't do that. But see the big picture. Israel's becoming powerful, and the church is becoming more persecuted. The church was and that's the point I want to bring out. And it is time to repair the altar. It is time to say, yes, there's evangelism, yes, there's theology, yes, there's building a body, and some things have just fallen apart. And the Bible says, I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplications. And they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him. Hey, him is me. Look at that. I've looked at that in Hebrew. Mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. The pierced bit is mentioned in the Gospels when they took Jesus off the cross, but that's not a complete fulfillment of it. It just shows he was pierced. Because if you look at the other verses in Zechariah there, it has to do with the cataclysmic event. Okay, any questions? Comments? Anything?
Are you done?
Do you want me to turn this off?
No.
If you have
Why-
questions, and if you don't want to record it, I'll turn the recording off now.
Why is it that Israelites have to learn how to speak Arabic?
I thought about that too.
Politics. Arabic is an official language there. It's Hebrew, Arabic. When I was there, the official languages were Hebrew, Arabic, and English.
Do the Arabs have to learn English? Have to learn Hebrew?
They did, as I understand it, they did when I was there, but they don't now. This is what I'm hearing from someone there. Either they don't or they're going to change the law. But I think at this point they don't. What it is when you get a liberal government in, and they had a liberal government in, they kind of make a lot of concessions to the Arabs, and then you get a conservative government in, and it's still like us, Every couple of elections, the pendulum swings. I don't think Arabs have to learn Hebrew now. From what I understand, I would have to look that up to be sure. But that was a complaint I heard from someone living there. They aren't going to have to they don't, maybe even now, have to learn Hebrew. And it might have been a law that had recently changed or something. I heard it from someone who's been there for a while.
Well, why do the Muslims think that that's their land?
Because it used to be. That used to be Muslim.
Where is the proof or documentation on the property that is their land?
They used to live there.
Well,
Yeah,
no, so did the Jews. The
Okay,
Jews
I
and
know.
other 11 tribes.
But-
So what's the argument?
Muslim doctrine says once we get a land, it's ours forever. Okay? I'm not saying that's right. I'm saying that's what they believe.
So anybody can say that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Muslims, according to Bernard Lewis, when Muslims own, once they get control of a land, they have to get it back if they lose it, because once it's theirs, it's supposed to be theirs forever.
Well, then that justification is why they're bullied, because they just don't know how to comprehend the land and its ownership,
Well, that depends, okay?
and who built that land, and who paid
Yeah.
for that building of that land, because it was the ownership of Israel from the day that they came in from Egypt, and they took that land from the occupants that in that general era, except they didn't follow God's complete overall, taking of the land.
Well, here's the Bible saying one thing, here's the Muslims saying another, okay? That's the thing. Different religions look at it differently.
Well, again, that's the reason why the justification for bullshit, because they don't understand. The Bible is a lot older than the Quran.
Well, I know.
Well, if you wanted to argue about it,
Yeah.
who were the Canaanites? Were they not Arabs? Because Jews took the land from the Canaanites who were already there.
Yeah.
So-
Well, that's the justification for driving them out. It happened under Joshua and subsequent people like David, and we can do it again. Okay? And that makes biblical sense. But in the New Testament, we're supposed to be winning them, not running them down. And to say, get out, when they've been living there for a long time. Okay? Now try preaching to them. My point, yeah, the Arabs have their own justification, the Muslims. Christians and Jews can point to the Bible. In the New Testament, we're supposed to be winning people, and you're not going to win people after you told them to get out. Okay? You can't go in, kick a bunch of people out of their land. Yeah, I mean, yes, maybe Old Testament, maybe biblically it's justifiable. But it's not biblical for us as New Testament Christians to run them down. I deal with this 5 or 6 days a week. I deal with people that have done some nasty things. Okay? And I'm not talking about speeding tickets. I'm talking about things I don't want to publicize. I have to treat them with respect. I am representing the Tennessee Department of Correction. They know where I'm coming, words around that I'm a pastor. They know I'm a Christian. I was complimented by a Muslim. I just walked in as a CO, correctional officer, before I became a counselor. He said, "You're so peaceful." People know. People know. My workers know. My language is certainly different. I don't use bad language. Everybody knows there where I'm coming from. I have to treat people that have done some awful things with respect. It doesn't mean I let them break rules. I treat them with respect. And I think as Christians, in order to win some of them, you're not going to win them after telling them that they shouldn't be there. Okay, there's all these different, Muslims think they belong there. Jews would like to drive them out. Christians can quote the Bible and say they shouldn't be there. Fine, Christian. Now go and preach to them. After you've told them that. After you've justified the Israeli mistreatment of them.
Well,
And if we're going to go back to the Joshua days, fine, but forget the gospel, because that's not the gospel. The gospel is very different.
well, even the old covenant people could convert to Judaism. Strangers outside the land
Yeah.
had the right, like Rahab and her whole family
Yeah.
came and they went through the purification process and they became part of Israel. So these people, even today, if you want to look at it from an Old Testament perspective,
Yeah.
they could welcome these people who were friendly with them. They
Yeah.
aren't supposed to bring in enemies, but
Yeah.
if they were people friendly who want to become part of the culture in a peaceful way, but that's the problem, is they're not friendly with each other. You know, all that ongoing
Sometimes.
bullying, you called it.
Yeah.
you
Well,
know.
it depends. Sometimes the Israelis are nice to him in very many ways. Sometimes they're very not so nice to him. Okay. And I'm not even saying the Israelis don't have a right to the land. I'm saying as a Christian, I can't run down any group and expect to preach to them. I mean, certainly in the prison we've learned, I mean, you don't bring up what they've done. Well, we have to sometimes as a counselor, you have to write reports and everything, you know, what were you thinking, blah, blah, blah. But we can't run them down. And I find the same thing in evangelism. How can you evangelize people you've been running down? Yeah, they had a right to get thrown out of their land. Fine, go preach to them now. You have just violated the Great Commission. As when you're running down people, and you can't preach to them after it. The thing for us is to understand all this. But as Christians, we cannot violate the Great Commission. That's preach the gospel to them, and you're not going to be able to reach them if you have run them down and told them that they had every right to get thrown out of their land. That's the problem with Christians these days. We don't understand. We become so Zionistic. I have no use for the Palestinians. Excuse me? Can you find that in the New Testament? Can you find that as a way of reaching them for the gospel? They ought to just get out. Fine, try preaching to them after you've said that. That's the problem we have as Christians. We don't understand these things, and when we do, we take a side, which we shouldn't be, maybe. Same thing happened to us 40 years ago under Falwell, by the way. You get a newsletter, here's a Christian running for office, but he's not going to win, so don't vote for him. Vote for the other guy who's not a Christian because he's conservative, and maybe he'll beat the liberal guy. I mean, it got real crazy back in those days. And if you had different political views, because you could see both sides of a coin, then your pastor, you were now disloyal to the church. That's the problem I have. I'm not running down Falwell. I'm saying these things that, you know, we diversify our portfolios. We're supposed to be preaching the gospel, but now we're also going to get involved in politics and split the church with them. Or, yes, I am very Zionistic, by the way, but I am not going to run down the Palestinians any more than I'm going to run down my inmates. You're not going to win them that way. And by the way, I don't preach to my inmates. We do have a chaplaincy, and we got about 400 volunteers that come in. About 400.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, they get a lot of religion in that
Wow.
prison. It's just hardest with the people in high security because they're all segregated in different cells that they can't get out of. But most of them have all kinds of access to religion. But I'm not there to preach, but they know where I'm coming from. And I treat them with respect, and they like it. And when someone does preach to them, maybe they'll actually listen a little better. Our commission is to preach the gospel. Yes, Jesus is going to come back, I believe, and restore that land to Israel. Just like the apostles were asking, when's this going to happen? He says, you don't know when. Here's what you have to do now. Preach the gospel to every creature. The Samaritans, uttermost part of the earth, you know what the pagans were like? They had to preach to them. And Christianity did, as much as we can say all that off of Catholic Church or all that stuff, which I don't believe, by the way. They happened to drive the demons out of a lot of countries. In fact, if you have an exorcism, you got to call a Catholic priest. Protestants can't do it, I don't believe. I've never heard of it. I heard of a situation when there was like a demon in a house, and I heard a head pastor of a ministry hearing about it, right? I was sitting right there. Well, and he couldn't figure it out, and they went back to eating. Okay? If I ever really had to exercise, I would call a Catholic priest. I think he could do it. There's a lot of shades to religion, to history, and everything that most of us are willing to look at. including the fact that we can run down Catholicism all we want, but what in the world drove the pagans became Christians often because of Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Okay, there was, and I understand there. I mean, I spent years outside my comfort zone of evangelical Christianity on purpose, learning other churches by going to them. You know, Reformed, Lutheran, Calvinistic, even CREC, which is now, it started out as Confederation of Reformed Evangelical Churches. It's now Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches. Kind of a hot button topic even amongst Reformed people. Roman Catholic, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Orthodox Church of America. I know what these guys believe. We don't understand how much good, at least historically, some of this organized religion, and then it can be horrendously anti-Semitic, slaughtering Jews all over the place. So, I mean, we got to see that truth is often multifaceted. There can be two sides to a coin. There could be several things. Our problem is we look at one side. I can look at the Zionistic side and like it. I can look at the humanitarian side of what the early, what the Israelis have done to the Arabs and not like it. And I can also look at what the Bible says and say that I'm not going to run down anybody. I have to be preaching the gospel. That is our job. And anything that gets in the way is, in my opinion, a sin. Anything else? Most of us can't see several sides of an issue at once. That was very apparent to me back in the days of Falwell. One side is presented to you. The reason America works is because neither side gets control. You want to go back to the old days before unions, fine. You're not going to have people in your church. Because when you're working 6 days a week, you're too tired to go to church. Only the rich go to church. You want to run down unions? I've worked for a union. Okay? You want to run down unions and all the good old days before all the socialism? Yeah. The nation was enslaved at that time. There's two sides to this. You've got to see the whole thing, and most people can't. Or if they try to, they're considered disloyal to their pastors. Okay? That's the trick, is to see the whole thing. To see that these Russian Orthodox who hate Jews, hate them, maybe not today, but certainly and probably even today, a lot of them, in Russia, they actually, it sure beat their paganism that they had before Orthodoxy came into being. You have to see the whole thing. Hardly anyone I've talked to can seem to do that. You have to see, it's not just right, this group's right and that group's wrong. Is this group's got some good and bad, and this group's got some good and bad, and that's what we're looking at. And what do I have to do? My ultimate job is to preach the gospel. So I'm not going to run down the Palestinians and say you need to get out of there. I'm just going to realize it's an unsolvable problem. It's going to bring the whole world on to Israel, and that's going to trigger the second advent. That's my opinion of it.
It's a solvable problem. You just walk in there and convert all the Jews and all the Arabs to Christ, and then they'll all be brothers.
Yeah. Which isn't going to happen. But you convert as much as you convert, get as many as you can converted, and don't run down anybody. Okay?
Yep. I agree.
I have to do this 5 or 6 days a week, not with conversion, but treating people with respect. And if you knew some of what they did,
well, you always get more done when you treat people in the manner on which you want to be treated.
You know what I like where I am? The wardens treat me with respect. They know where I'm coming from. Top people treat me with respect. That means a lot, because I worked in places where I'm not treated with respect. Okay? And it makes all the difference in the world. I, as a Christian, cannot tell the Arabs. I can sympathize with them. I understand what the Bible says. But my primary job is to preach the gospel. You cannot preach the gospel to people you've been running down. That's the point.
Unless you apologize. If you begin with an apology, you possibly could.
That's the thing.
Well, I think this whole situation is just on as consistent. It stays consistently on this grind to try to cooperate as the best they can, get along with each other the best they can, because the geographical location is so important and rich in value of historical and again religious history. It's just so deep and steeped in it that it can never be completely resolved. Completely. So it has to be dealt with. And like, it's not always like you said, the way you want, but it's just the way it has to be done.
Christ is going to deal with it.
Yeah, it cannot. What's going on in the Middle East, we cannot resolve. Christ will have to.
He will resolve it. When his feet hit the Mount of Olives.
Yeah. We can't solve it. So treat both sides with respect. Try to win some, and you're not going to win them after you run them down.
Right.
That's where we Christians have to get. Well, that's where we have to repair the altar. We've been too involved. I mean, I still have ideas of what I'd like to study as far as Jewish history and stuff. It fascinates me.
Me too.
And obviously, I'm not against the Jews. What I am against is running down to people, because really, as a Christian, which is more important to me than being a Jew, it's the Christianity's going to get me to heaven, not my ethnic background. John the Baptist made that pretty clear at the beginning. And so we have to realize that we're supposed to be winning people, and you're not going to win them after you've run them down. And I deal with this, in a sense, 5 or 6 days a week. I get plenty of practice in not running people down.
We know that's not the Holy Spirit. We know it's not of God. We ought to, in our lives with Christ, have already this distinction to discern our thoughts toward humanity, to give a good outcome. Or exactly like you said, our commission to preach the gospel. And we do that in the best capacity in what's available. You don't have to say, the gospel, but how you treat other people is actually works in the same as an example of an ambassador for Christ.
Well, here's another one I heard, and it was in a church. We used to go to this church, Colorado, okay, and have a meal afterwards, and then have communion with the meal. And I was talking about, that lone survivor thing, that guy that, remember when in Afghanistan, I think it was, a couple of shepherds or something ran into some Americans, and the Americans were going to kill them, and they said, no, we won't tell anybody, and most of the Americans ended up getting killed, and one guy survived. Okay? Well, I was talking to some Christians, and one said they were barbarians. Okay? In other words, these Afghans, whatever. Maybe they are. You ever see Paul when he says, I think it's Titus, you've heard that these people in this particular place are lazy, blah, blah, blah. And you think the next sentence would be, don't be prejudiced. He says they are. And see, these are the people you're dealing with. Even if they are barbarians, so what? You're still supposed to try to win them. That's the thing. And you look at Paul, it's really interesting when he says that, because you really think, don't be prejudiced, against them. He says, no, they are. They're a bunch of, lazy, whatever. And they might be like that. Muslims have some habits which I find deplorable, circumcising women, and this. In Israel, I think it's, amongst the Arabs, it's 25% consanguinity. That's how you pronounce it. In other words, you're marrying close relatives, typically cousins. I can remember being there, going to a Nazarene church in Nazareth, run by an American who would speak through a translator, and his wife was there too. And he mentions that 2 sisters got together and married off their kids. So one girl finally figures out how to get on the bus. She's 14 years old. She's just been forced into an arranged marriage, comes down crying to him. Okay, this is what Arabs do. Now, I don't like that. I don't like that type of thing. For that matter, what the Hasidim sometimes do with their arranged marriages, but especially forcing you to marry a close relative. And you know something? My job as a Christian is to win them, not to call them a bunch of whatever. That's the problem we have. We take sides where maybe we shouldn't be. We should just say, here's what's going on. I am not going to run them down. And again, I get plenty of practice of this on the job.
After listening to all this, I'm just not fully convinced you feel that that's that important about this respect thing. I just don't think you really
What do you mean?
mean it.
You've only said it 25
he's being
times.
funny. He's being funny. Well, I know. But it's where, you know,
Yeah, he's just being.
I'm going to turn this off now. He's being funny, you people out there that are going to watch this on
It's
YouTube.
called pulling your leg.
But it's, well, you know,
Are you really sure?
it's both sides. You know, you just have to show anybody respect. I get to show it to a bunch of felons. And they know, they at least know my background. So there's kind of a silent witness, but even though I don't preach to them. And it really gets hot when I go up to high security, and that's where they try to manipulate you. Okay, that's where they get really, really manipulative and threatening. And as a CO, I was assigned to the building with the most dangerous felons, one of the pods. Boy, if I could tell you what, but I'm not going to.
Right.
But you learn, you simply treat them with respect, and then they settle down. In fact, if you get attacked as a guard, you know what they'll ask you? What did you do to upset them? They blame the guard. Because
Wow.
usually, if you treat them with respect, they won't. If you treat them with disrespect, especially the gang part,
Yeah.
they have to retaliate. I mean, you do not, in fact, if you had talked to a gang leader, you have to pull him aside away from his buddies. And you have to be nice. I mean, I could go on and on with details, but what goes on in the prison stays in the prison.
Good.
But I could really go on with details, and it's, but you learn this because you have to. You have to learn to treat people with respect that are threatening you. And I understand I understand the situation, how God is promising the land, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not going to say, fine, God's given them the land, the rest of you get out of Judea, get out of Samaria, go back to, you know, Jordan or Syria, wherever your ancestors came from. And I know the Arabs politicize this
Yeah, but we don't want.
and all that. My job is to show them with respect and to
Yes.
try to win them, period.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn this off now. It's so redundant. Wow, almost 2 hours.